Good morning and welcome to our week 4. So we're now getting into some really interesting civilizations. And today we're going to talk about a really neat one called Persia. And Persia is really significant because it is one of the largest empires. And we had talked about already, if you remember, that the Assyrians were the largest empire that the world had ever seen, and they get conquered. And then the Persians are going to come, and they're going to be even larger. They're going to go from Turkey all the way over to almost to India through Pakistan, and then they're going to come south. And so they're this significant empire, and they're going to last until they are conquered by Alexander the Great, who was one of my absolute favorite people in history, and I can't wait to teach you about him. So let's take a little review from last week. Let's move over here to the side. Let's take a little review from last week. Let's make sure that we're still on pace for what we're supposed to know. So true or false? Is Judaism a monotheistic religion? True. Yes, it is. And we're actually going to learn about another monotheistic religion today. Who is the founder of Judaism? Abraham. Remember that Abraham, through him, God set up a covenant that all Abraham had to do was to obey God, and then as a result, God would bless him. The law code of the Jews, it would be found in their holy book, the Torah, and the most important of their law code, because remember, they have over 600 laws, but the most important is their top 10, the 10 Commandments. And the Phoenicians were known for developing the first letter alphabet, so they developed the first alphabet. Remember, the key word to help you remember that is thinking about phonics, with the word we get the word from Phoenicians. Where did mankind originate from? Where did man start? We started, remember, in Africa. And then we're going to set up the 4 river valley civilizations. So Persia is still going to be in Mesopotamia area along the Tigris and Euphrates, but they're going to expand. So another review question. I couldn't find this picture last week to share with you. So this is a very young Miss DeLong. And I am standing beside, does anybody recognize this? This is the Code of Hammurabi. So I told you that it was taller than me, and it definitely is. And you can see at the top, like the law code being given to Hammurabi. And what we need to remember about Hammurabi's code of law, it's his first written code of law, and that it's very strict, eye for an eye. Remember, it also varies according to class. So if you're a slave or a woman or you weren't wealthy, like it doesn't apply to you the same as it would to people who are of equal class. And then this is another great picture I found. Both of these pictures were taken in Paris in the Louvre Museum. And the Louvre has a lot of very famous artifacts. Not only does it have paintings, but it also has tons and tons of things from lots of ancient civilizations. And so this is at the opening to the Persian section. And that is my brother. And my brother is a tall guy. My brother is 6'2", 6'3", and he is standing beside this, it's called the winged lion. Now, as you enter in, like where my brother is standing, I'm going to show you the back side of it. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? Like how huge and large that this is. The Persians were super advanced, crazy wealthy. And a lot of that came from taxing their people, but they do attack a lot of people and also make money that way as well. So let's think a little bit. I'll make myself a little bit smaller here. It's magic of technology. So we're looking here at the Persian Empire. So they were Indo-European people, which means that they came from Asia and from Europe, and they settled in Iran. So remember that Iran is here. Now, I know a lot of people say Iran, but remember, I lived in Turkey for 4 years, and the correct way is actually Iran, like an E instead of an I, is the correct way to say it. I'm not going to fuss at you if you say Iran, but you'll notice that I always say Iran. So here is where the Persians were. Now, Sardis to Persepolis, that's pretty much what we're looking at where they develop a road, and it's going to be important. I've actually been to Sardis, amazing little town on the coast of Turkey. And they're going to have this whole area. And Persepolis was super, super wealthy. And they even have a bit of Egypt as well. So at their height, their empire spread from the Nile River to the Indus River. So Persia is located in present-day Iran, and it actually was called Persia up until probably maybe your grandparents, depending how old your parents are. So basically in like the 1920s, 30s, 40s, after World War I, they switched the name and started calling it Iran. So it started along the Mesopotamian society, along the Tigris and Euphrates, and then eventually was spread to the Nile and again all the way to the Indus River, which is in present-day Pakistan. It's basically the area, kind of dividing line between India and Pakistan. One of the things that makes the Persians so successful, like why people didn't rise up against them, is because they were very tolerant of the people that they conquered. So if you think about, a lot of places would come in, they would conquer, then they make everybody switch. Persians didn't do that. They're like, what are you doing well? You keep it. And they basically just said, we need you to pay taxes. And so they developed an imperial bureaucracy. And what I mean by that, bureaucracy is they had a very, that's like how our government works. They had a very like detailed system of how things work, like who you answered to. They put guys called satraps who were like governors. They would appoint them over the different provinces. And they set up a very, very efficient system. They're going to construct the Royal Road, which we're going to see cuts down travel time significantly. And they also began a new religion. While it's not popular today, it was during that time period in the kingdom, and it was called Zoroastrianism. So the founder of the Persian Empire is a man by the name of Cyrus the Great. So as you can tell from his title, he's pretty great, right? So they began by defeating the Babylonians. And they come in and the Babylonian Empire ends. And one of the first things that Cyrus does is he ends the Jewish captivity. Remember that they have tolerance for the conquered people. And the Jews who had been taken to Babylon weren't very happy about being away from their homeland. So he sends them back. So he doesn't rule for a huge amount of time. I mean, it's 30 years. It's a pretty good amount of time. But he was a great leader. And he sets that standard of being respectful or tolerant of other cultures. He let people keep their religions and keep their customs. And so that's why we call him Cyrus the Great. His son, who is actually considered to be the greatest ruler, is Darius the First. Actually, it might be his grandson. But anyway, Darius the First, or actually in the Iranian, they would say Darius. So either one you can say, Darius the First or Darius. He's their greatest ruler, and he's the one who really sets up this imperial bureaucracy. So he divides the governor into provinces, or states, if you will, and then he puts governors, or satraps, in charge. And so these are important vocabulary words. He rules for quite a bit of time. Okay, he rules for about almost 40 years, so a little bit longer than Cyrus. And he expands the empire all the way to India, to the Indus River. He builds the capital city at Persepolis. They actually had 3 capitals, Persepolis, Susa, and Sardis. And he builds the Royal Road. So the Royal Road is going to make things so much more efficient that they used to travel the same distance. It took 3 months, and now it's down to 7 days. That's huge. And along the road, they had couriers, basically like a Pony Express, who would pass things around. So here's a picture of the Royal Road. It goes from Sardis to Susa, and it would run through Nineveh. Remember that Nineveh was an important Assyrian town. So it was just under 2,000 miles long. So there was over 100 different stations. They were about 15 miles apart where people could stop, report things, send messages. And then these relay stations had fresh horses for the messengers. So they would go to the next. It's very much like how our Pony Express worked in the back in the Wild West, in our time. And they could cover the whole road in 7 days. So this is amazing that they were able to do this. Huge achievement. So you can see there's a painting at the top of the couriers. But I thought you might be more interested in their military. So there's a picture below of the Immortals. So the Immortals is what Herodotus, who is the father of history, he wrote the history of the Persians. And he is the first one to call them Immortals. So this elite army that Darius sets up, had 10,000 soldiers in this army. They always had 10,000, exactly 10,000. And the reason they were called Immortals is because if you died or you couldn't fulfill your responsibility, there was another guy who would step up and take your place. So it would seem like no one ever died, that there always was 10,000, that there's never this end. So these are an elite fighting force that fought for the king. Okay, so we've already talked about this, but again, it's super important that Darius lets his conquered people retain their cultures. He sets up this imperial bureaucracy, this kind of organization of the government, and that each province or state is ruled by a governor. Collects taxes, is the judge, gets the soldiers for the army, doing the draft, all of that. Now, his son is Xerxes. And Xerxes, if you actually are familiar with the Bible and the story of Esther, Esther actually marries Xerxes, okay? He has two names. Most of these guys did. And if you watched 300 Spartans, you might also be familiar with this guy. And so he wages a war against the Greeks. He starts the Persian War, and it's the Persian Wars. So it's going to end up being not so well. Like the first war that they have is the Peloponnesian War, which we'll talk about more when we get to Greece. But the Persian Wars, in essence, weaken the Persian Empire because the attacking of the Greeks did not go as well as they thought. They started by attacking some Greek colonies, and the Greeks did not respond very well to this. And then eventually they decide to land invade Greece. And if you're familiar with the story of the 300 Spartans, they stand and delay the Persian arrival. And so we are going to talk about the 300 Spartans when we get to Sparta, and we'll talk more about the Greek side of this battle. But for right now, all we need to understand is that this invasion of Greece is going to weaken the empire because ultimately they will lose. So the Persian Empire will fall because the kings become more and more greedy. They want more and more, but the empire becomes weak. And again, starting with that invasion of Greece. And they start fighting with each other. There's assassinations of everybody. And eventually they're defeated by one of my absolute favorite people in history, which I already mentioned before, is Alexander the Great. And I have actually seen this mosaic. It's actually on the floor in Pompeii. And I was so excited because I'm like, this is always in textbooks. And like, here it is. You can see the little piece of it chipped away, but it was preserved really well because if you're not familiar with Pompeii, there was a volcano that came and destroyed this Roman town. But Alexander the Great, he's from Macedonia, and we're going to talk about him soon. And he will be the one who is going to lead to the defeat of the Persian Empire. And we will talk about that. But what do we need to remember about the Persians? Okay, so the fact that they're so tolerant of their conquered people, they're the largest empire at this time period, that they set up this kind of bureaucracy and organized everything so that they could, have control of everything, collect taxes and all this. They're super wealthy, and things will go pretty well until they get conquered by Alexander the Great. All right, so you got a little activity. It's a map of Persia and then the grapes. So remember, you can refer to your notes when you're doing the grapes activities so that you can make sure that you're getting all the things that you need for that. Remember, with the grapes activities, you're looking at, government, religion, achievement, the politics, the society, how are things stratified and all of that. And so your note sheet that you got with your weekly module will be very helpful. All right, so I'll see you later this week as we talk about India and China.